Hey, welcome to Brian for Liberty. I am hitting one of my topics in my last video. If you watched it, I said I was going to be talking about some of the things that I'm looking for candidates in the 2024 race. I'm here in South Carolina, but this applies from a libertarian perspective, would apply just about anywhere. So I'm going to get into it. Today's topic is school choice and why we should have school choice. And when I say school choice, I want to be very clear. I don't mean some half-ass measure of, you can go to a charter school and schools have to meet these government laid out criteria and here's a government approved curriculum, or these are mandated government curriculum that have to be addressed in the school. That's not what I mean by school choice. What I mean by school choice is we fund students, not institutions. And as such, the money that we communally have agreed to pay to educate our children goes directly to the parents of those children to spend on education as they see fit. It could be a voucher system. The only requirement is that the money has to be spent on an educational investment in the children. That's it. That's the only requirement. But we have to start with, when I say we have agreed to communally pay for the education of our children, I have to clarify that. As a libertarian, I don't agree that enforced taxation, which means I don't agree in taxation. What I will say is that we should come together as a community and spend money to educate our children, because I think that is something that benefits society as a whole. I think everybody would agree that we as an entire society benefit when we educate our children, when we educate the children in our society, whether we have children or not. So a lot of arguments can be made as to whether people with children should be taking on a greater financial burden in the education of their children versus people who don't. But at the end of the day, I believe that we can all come together and agree, yes, our entire society benefits from educating our children, and therefore we should work together as a community to educate them. Because everybody, I believe, at least the overwhelming majority of people would agree with that, I would also say that you don't need to force people to pay for schools. And I would say that in the absence of a forced tax to pay for schools, if schools had to come out and earn the money, they would be better at what they do and they'd be more efficient, just like everything else in the market versus things that the government does. And this goes back to, and this is going to be a repeating theme on this channel, on my podcast, is that government is not good at doing things. That doesn't mean we don't have to collectively work together to achieve goals. It just means that force and taxation is not the best way to get there. Voluntary cooperation is much more efficient and a much better way to do things. And voluntary exchange is the best way to set that up. Free markets are better than government, and so on and so on. But outside of a forced tax, I do believe we would come together as a community and we would voluntarily contribute in some way to the education of children. So just want to get that out of the way before any of my libertarian credentials get questioned. No, I don't believe in forced taxation, but yes, I do believe that we should communally educate our children, at least contribute to the education of children. And I believe that we would do that without force. So those are some important points to get started with. So there's a couple of very important reasons that we should engage in school choice, that we should have a fully vouchered system where we are funding children and not institutions. And the first and foremost is we are a free society. We are supposed to be a free people. And what that means is I should be free to make the choice on how my child is educated. And this is the problem with any socialist type idea. And I know everybody's going to start screaming and yelling, oh, public schools aren't socialism. And now you think Social Security is socialism and everything the government does is socialism. Okay, calm down. First, public education is as close to actual socialism in this country as you can get. It is a government-owned and operated enterprise. It is not a vouchered system. It's not Medicare where the government pays for you to go and use a private institution to get health care. It is a fully government-operated entity from the top down. So in reality, it is probably as close to actual socialism as you're going to get. And for those of you who are out there and support socialism, I just challenge you to take a look at our public education system. But I digress. I do believe that like I said, I do believe that we should communally educate children. I do believe, so when we talk about socialist ideas and the issue of socialist ideologies, and we look at public school and the dangers of public school as it applies to us as a free people, the danger of socialist type ideas is what I was getting at. The danger of socialist type ideas is that once we are communally paying for something, that everybody has opinion about how those funds are spent should have some merit. So everybody gets some input into how we educate our children. And the same thing is this applies across the board. We start talking about the government doing things universally, like universal health care, and things like that. Don't think that there's not going to be a standard. Don't think that there's not going to be strings attached to the government giving you something. So one of the reasons that we need school choice and a completely vouchered system and a 100% free market educational system funded on the back end by communities is because we are a free people. And even though we are working together to educate children, at the end of the day, the educational decision should be with the parents. And I'm not going to engage in culture war stuff, but if you look at some of the items that are taking place in the culture war, some of this is because we are forced to associate with each other. We've lost our freedom of association. And one of those places is in the public schools, where people of very differing opinions are being pushed together. And there's a lot of controversy over what we should be educating, what we should be teaching kids in school, what we should be exposing children to, and at what ages that's appropriate. And parents should be able to look out into a marketplace and find something that aligns with their values and say, this is how I want my child to be educated. Parents should be allowed to make that choice. And so because we're a free nation, we're a nation of free people, the predominant and moral reason to have a fully free and vouchered educational system for our children is because we are free. And like everything else, when you look at this force, this elimination of freedom of association, this is where you get into all this confrontation and this conflict and this idea that I'm going to use the state, I'm going to use the government to impose my will on you. And that's it. That's at the core of a lot of the issues that we have is that. Now, I'm not going to break into and go running off into a bunch of different statistics and an analysis of the public education system. I think that all of us know very well how poorly our public education system has performed. We all know it. There's 100 other sources of that information of how bad our public schools do, particularly since the advent of the Federal Department of Education, the federal government getting involved in education. The expense, the cost to educate children here in the United States versus other places, and then you compare that with the educational standards and the educational outcomes in other places versus the United States, and it's very clear that our public schools perform horribly and that they have gotten far worse since we have allowed the federal government to creep in and get involved. So I don't know necessarily that I have to rehash that and break out a bunch of specific. Everybody knows it. Even liberals will tell you that our public schools aren't performing well. But the problem is they'll come in and they'll say, well, it's because we're not. It's because we don't have enough money. And I think that then that's when the statistical arguments start and we say, oh, I'm going to lift my chair up here a bit. That's where we say, okay, well, look at this school and they spend less than that, and blah, 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 blah. And we get into that circular argument. The fact of the matter is our public schools don't do well. They just don't perform well. And if you really break it down, the public schools are failing the people who need them the most. They're failing low-income people, predominantly low-income people living in densely populated urban areas. And based on the demographics of our country, there's a disproportionate impact then on minorities, people of color, immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because that's where they live. And so the people who would, in one conversation, call themselves allies, at the same time are saying we are not going to let you out of this system. So it's absolutely critical to draw a straight line to one of the biggest disparities in our society is caused by the disparity in educational outcomes. And if we can level that playing field, then within a generation, you're going to start seeing those disparities start to disappear. And that to me that's the golden ticket in reality. And when you look at the way public schools are distributed and how that performance shakes out, and you think about how a market actually functions, an entrepreneur who's going to take advantage of the fact that there's all this free capital to be invested in education, the parents can direct outside of the public school system. The first place entrepreneurs are going to go to spend their money and invest in educational, building mathnasiums and bring alternative educational facilities to the marketplace. The first place they're going to go is the place where they're most needed. So they're going to go to the most underserved, where the worst performing public schools. They're going to go where the demand is. And the demand is where schools are performing the worst. So the people who most need educational opportunity, who most need a greater opportunity to choose an educational path for their children or to put their children into alternative educational settings, those are going to be the first places where you're going to see major investment from the marketplace trying to meet that demand as quickly as possible. And so that's the other side of it. What's interesting to me is one of the arguments against a vouchered system is fundamentally that it would destroy the public school system. And I find that fascinating for two reasons. First, who cares? In that argument, in most arguments against a vouchered system, you are not going to get a conversation about performance. You're not going to get a response that is centered on educational outcomes for children. That's not where you're not going to get educational performance. You're not going to get, look how good public schools are doing. You're not going to get, that's not the defense. The defense is only of the institution of public education. And I find that very interesting because it's a little self-defeating. First, it's telling me that your number one priority isn't the children. But second, it tells me that public schools aren't very good because any competition would lead to their destruction. If I said that I can't allow another store to open in this town, like I'm a store owner in any town USA, and we're the only store in town, and you say we need to open up another store, and I say no, if you open another store, I'll go out of business. What I'm telling you is that my business is being operated so poorly that I cannot stand up to any level of competition or I will crumble. So not only are they not talking specifically about educational achievement and what's best for the kids when they defend public schools and when they talk about being opposed to vouchers, they're actually stating the opposite. They're saying public schools are so bad that any competition that enters into the marketplace will destroy the public school. That's crazy as a defense against options, as a defense against a free market system. It'll destroy the public schools. That means that you're literally admitting that public schools can't stand up to competition, which is in fact a statement of how poorly they're doing, particularly again in areas where people who would need the best possible education and the best possible educational opportunities for their kids are living. I'm going to take a quick drink here. Keep my voice from cracking. See, look, I come back, I'm already deeper voice. Got that cleared up. I'm going to take a look here. I did take some notes. I'll probably cut all of this out anyway. So at the end of the day, when we talk about school choice and we talk about a vouchered system, what we're really talking about is a core belief. If this is an issue, and I'm going to, on every one of my topics, every one of the things that I'm going to talk about here, from school choice to healthcare, every issue that I touch on here, you're on this channel, as it pertains particularly to the 2024 race, you're going to be able to see a pattern of, you either believe in basic economic theory, which is pretty much a supply and demand, free market, economic system as the best way to organize an economy, or you believe in a centrally planned economy. And I think most people would say that we understand that market principles are real, that supply and demand is a real thing, that the market's more efficient at allocating resources. Even if it's not perfect, government's terrible. Most people would say that government's not good at doing things. They may blame the other party, but they'll acknowledge that government's not good at doing things. Therefore, centrally planned economic theories don't usually pan out, and we're better off left to the market. Then in the next breath, the people who will defend public schools, the people on the left side of the economic argument, would say, yes, but education is too important to be left to the market. Healthcare is too important to be left to the market. That's a silly argument. If free market economics is a better way of distributing and allocating resources, if it is, and I believe that it is, then the more important the thing is, the widget is, right? The more important that widget is, the more important it is exposed to free market forces. The more efficient it needs to be delivered, the more innovation needs to be allowed into that space. I mean, think about this. We are still educating children like we did at the turn of the century. We still have a teacher standing in front of a room of kids, lecturing them and teaching them to memorize things and resuscitate those things back. That's essentially how we educate kids today. That should be insane. That should be crazy to you. That we haven't, education should look very, very differently than it did 50 years ago. It should look very different than it did before the information age. I mean, it's incredible how similar. Go into your public school and tell me how much different it is. I'm 47 years old. If I walk into my local public school, I know it's going to be very similar to my experience when I was 7 years old, right? What's 7? 5 is kindergarten, 6 is first grade, so second grade. If I walk into a second grade classroom right now, it's going to be very similar, virtually identical to the second grade classroom that I was in 40 years ago. That in and of itself should tell you that there's something wrong with public education and we need more innovation in that marketplace. And so when I talk about free markets and I talk about education, I'm saying that because it's the opposite of what they're saying. When they say that education is too important to be left to the market, I'm saying, no, it's so important it has to be left to the market. That's the core argument of a vouchered education system. It's not that education is too important to be trusted to the free market. It's that it's so important we can't leave it to government to run. That's the argument. That's where libertarians in particular, free market Republicans, small government Republicans who actually lean libertarian, and libertarians need to make that argument. No. I understand how important education is. That's why I don't trust it in the hands of government. That's why it should be open to the market. And then the answer to any argument is, what other area of the economy do you think we should turn over completely to the government? Cell phones, automobiles, computers, even healthcare. Even when you say universal healthcare, we should have Medicare for all, or whatever the case may be, whatever your beliefs are when it comes to healthcare. Nobody thinks the government should take over the hospitals and the doctors should work for the government. Nobody's advocating for that. They're saying we should fund individuals to go into a healthcare marketplace and buy healthcare, but government should backstop that and fund that, insure these people so they don't get left out. And there's an argument to be made. I don't agree with it, but there's an argument to be made there. But at the end of the day, nobody's advocating for the government to just take over all the hospitals and put all the doctors and make them all government employees. Only public education, no place else. So that's the second question. You defend your belief in the free market by advocating that education is so important it can't be trusted to government. And when they come back and say, no, we can't trust it to the market, you ask, what area of the market would you have ran like public schools, like the post office, like the DMV? There's no place in the private market where you go, yeah, I wish this was more like the Department of Motor Vehicles. I wish this was more like public schools. I'm just saying. So that's the argument to be made. That's the conversation we need to be having when it comes to public education. And what we need to do is have candidates who are bold enough and brave enough to stand up for that belief system, to say, yes, to stand in front of a crowd of people and say, I don't care about public education. I care about educational outcomes for students. I care that we have students trapped in a monolithic system that wealthy people can buy their way out of, but our low income diverse families, if that's the tact you need to take to convince somebody who's trapped in the worst performing public schools, and why don't they have a way out, and why do you oppose them having the ability to move their kids to another location? You know, if you read Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman, he talks a lot extensively about this, and he makes it a fascinating point. First, a low income person can't necessarily move into a nicer neighborhood to give their kid a better educational opportunity. Vouchering the system may allow them to send their kids someplace else for education, but more importantly, I think it'll bring better educational opportunities into their community. It'll bring better schools into that community and put better educational opportunities within reach of people who right now are trapped with no options but a poor performing public school. Now, bear in mind that public schools are also completely insulated by massive self-interest. From the people who sell the textbooks, from the vendors who sell them the school lunches, to the people who staff the lunchrooms, to the teachers' unions, these are all special interests that are surrounding the public education system, that are beyond the control and the power of the teachers and the parents, who have their fingers in the pot, and understand that the loss of a public school system, a compulsory public school system, would also open them up to competitive market forces and potentially cost them significant amounts of money. Don't underestimate the power. We talk about dark money and lobbying and all this stuff all the time. Don't underestimate the power of those same interests, even backing an institution that you may love and support. So if I've still got a Democrat or a socialist type or left-leaning person listening to me, don't underestimate the fact that tons of money that we are putting into the public education system, because government is so unwieldy and because government is so difficult to control. Don't underestimate the fact that there are a ton of special interests behind that local school mascot, with their hands in your pockets, redirecting funds that should be going into the classroom or should be going to teacher salaries into books, just go and look up the cost of educational textbooks at the elementary school level, at the junior high level, at the high school level. When we live in an information age where almost all these kids have a cell phone, we could buy cell phones for the schools and secure them and put them in otter boxes and you reuse them, or issue them at the freshman year and reissue them. There are ways to deliver knowledge and information to children that would break them free from these bonds, these monopolists who are essentially marketing to a government entity that isn't open to any competition. So that's the other side of this. Like everything else, we love our military, we love our troops, but we understand there's a ton of dark money and a ton of special interest behind our military, with their hands in in your pockets, directing where the billions and billions of dollars are going. The same thing is to be said for public education. So if you break that up and you open it up to the marketplace, you also are able to push out some of that corruption, a lot of that corruption. And because you're able to make choices, you can go to an educational institution that is making better use of your dollar than the public school is. And look, at the end of the day, I have no issue with the public school. If the public school is the best option, let them earn the money. Open them up to competition. This is something I touched on a little bit earlier. I'm not advocating for shutting public schools down. I'm saying open public schools up to competition. They still have the opportunity to be the best educational option. They still have the opportunity to earn that money back. So why not put that decision-making in the hands of parents? So I would look for, so this is mostly about the 2024 race and what we're talking about in candidates, and school choice is definitely a very, very high priority for me is school choice. And so I would definitely be looking for candidates who are talking about school choice, who are supporting school choice. And I know in a lot of states, I believe even here in South Carolina, this is something I'm going to be doing some research on for my South Carolina audience, my vast South Carolina audience, is to be looking into what we would need to do in terms of the state constitution in regards to education, and making sure that we can move away from a compulsory state education and into a free market for education. Because at the end of the day, that is what's going to be the best for the most number of children. And that's all that's important, and that's all that really matters. So, hey, thank you for stopping by, Brian for Liberty. This was a little bit longer one. My goal is to get these things up to about a half hour or so without just randomly blah, 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 rambling on like a high school kid stacking, right, double spacing and, adding a bunch of nonsense to his report to just keep it going. But I'm going to try and get these a little bit longer, have a little bit more substance in them. I hope you stuck around for the whole thing. If you did, thank you very much. If you like the content, like it, share it. And if you really like it, subscribe and leave a comment for me. I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.